Actually, I have to do that again. I think I just spoke before adding myself to the audio. So yeah, welcome to the 14th edition. I should know what to do by now, but obviously not. So yeah, I was just saying that this is I've got two guests, not rather than just one, for simplifying and creating data pipelines to add value, keeping to our value theme. But seeing I added them before I added myself, so I'll just say welcome Taylor McGrath and welcome CJ. Great to have you on here.
Yeah, thank you.
So I normally start with a little bit of an intro of how we individually met and the and the vendors you work with and why we partner with you as well. So I think, Taylor, we met at a very posh Wimbledon event, I think, when you first came over to London, and then randomly met up in Newcastle with a random stage of events where we're both in the same place at the same time. So you're from Rivery. Do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro?
Yeah, sure. I think it was meant to be, Chris, our run-in in Newcastle for sure. And more adequate to us in like northern England than Wimbledon. But yeah. I'm Taylor McGrath. I lead our solutions engineering at Rivery. So Rivery is an ELT platform. So it's kind of all across the board in terms of solution engineering. So prospects, customers, and like internal technical teams.
And so CJ, I think, we first met randomly sort of in Denver, but it was planned at least anyway. I think I put a post out. I was meant to go to a meetup that Ben Rogen, the Sattel Data guy, was performing, but it was snowed out, so no one went. But we still made it out, didn't we? So
yeah. Well, Chris, I think you're always in the right city at the right time, it seems.
I have been known as just-in-time Tab, so
just-in-time Tab, yeah,
the right place as well. But great. You work with a company called Coalesce, which again we partner with, and we think is a great addition to the ecosystem. But do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everyone, my name's CJ Oordt. I'm the director of strategic alliances here at Coalesce. So I look after our global SI partnerships as well as our technology partnerships with other tools in the ecosystem.
And a seasoned veteran. I remember the first time we met, we weren't short of things to discuss in the data world. It seemed you knew a lot of the same people I knew. So today it's the discussion is about simplifying and creating data pipelines to add value. I've been doing a lot of talk about business value and what it is, and for the context of this, we're talking about when adding value is to help the business increase its business performance using data. So that could be by optimization in the process of getting it, or it could be by what we're actually delivering as well. And quite rightly so, and typically with some of my typos, the first point that I put on there was incorrectly put on there of why automation is no longer an option, meaning you don't need it, which is not meant to be the case, I don't think. So the first topic we had was why not having automation in data pipelines is no longer an option now. So now we know what the real meaning of it. Taylor, what's your views on not having automation when creating pipelines these days?
Yeah, first I'm glad it was a typo because I was a little worried. Just giving an answer of why you don't need automation. But yeah, I think the key, not buzzwords, but the themes there are like time and speed to value, right? Like if things aren't automated, at least if the things that are easy aren't automated, then I think there's a lot more like manual work that goes into just delivering any sort of value. And I think also with the technology that's available today as well, there's a lot more, of that pipeline that we can automate to leave the manual parts to be the actual parts that like we should use humans for. The more people, real deep analysis, parts of the workflow.
Yeah, there was a good point there of splitting out things that we can automate without having a human intervention or human verification, and things we can use where we're always going to need that people as part of that. I think CJ, knowing what and context, right? Rivery provides the ingest, orchestration via rivers and reverse ETL. It provides the ability to call out your transformations, and then this is where Coalesce's sweet spot. And I've always thought it was a very good symbiotic capabilities of how the two sit together. You sit in that transformation space. So right. how are you seeing? What sort of automation are you seeing being used to help speed up the transformation component of your pipeline?
Right. Well, like you said, we're the T and ELT, and we're hyper focused on that, right? So we don't load data. We kind of dive deep into the transformation logic, and I actually think a couple of years ago that wouldn't have been a typo. The idea of automating the work of building data pipelines, building a data warehouse, that's not new. That's been around for 30 some odd years. But people have constantly tried it and left that approach because it wasn't working. And the kind of reason that it didn't work in the past is whatever you were automating just wasn't flexible enough. Especially now, the data landscape is so complex and there's so many additional use cases that just weren't even possible a few years ago. So the approach that we took is, we see this huge need for automation. I can kind of get into why, but if you're going to do it, you kind of got to go deep into one platform and make sure that anything that is possible on that platform can be authored by this tool. So, what Coalesce did is we go deep into Snowflake. We don't support any other platform, so that you can automate the build and management of not just a basic star schema, but building out any table type or view type that's possible on Snowflake. But the reason that I think you kind of have to start automating now. A great example, I think, is what we experienced at Snowflake Summit this year. If you were by the Coalesce booth, right, it was buzzing. There was a ton of people there the whole time. We had our magician, Danny Orleans. Shout out to Danny. He's our trade show secret. He brings in the crowds, and then it's a party at the Coalesce booth the whole time. But I was constantly talking to people about all this exciting new announcements that Snowflake was rolling out at Summit this year with all the the NVIDIA partnership and all the talk about LLMs and AI and everything, and everyone's like, oh yeah, it's super exciting, that's great. And then I'd say, what are you guys working on? And they'd be like, oh yeah, we're building a data warehouse. And so there's this dichotomy, right? There's this gap between everything that's possible on these new data platforms and what everyone's working on, right? And there's kind of a hierarchy of needs. So when I look at it now, why would you spend all of your manual engineering effort on the basics when it can be automated? Build that data foundation as quickly and as scalably as possible. Automate as much of it as you can, so that you can use those engineering cycles on the cutting edge stuff.
I like the term optimizing, and anyone out there, you'll probably hear I always say the same thing. So I've only got a few phrases, probably keep recycling. And the other way, it's friction. I always like to refer back in delivery friction. I think what you said there and talking about is where we need to automate, and we automate where it needs to be. We automate the where, and you do it in the order that reduces that friction. And if you're performing it that way, you're going to spend the least amount of effort to reduce the most amount of friction, and then when it's worth it, spend the time to optimize and automate. And I think the other thing you mentioned there, CJ, is as a recent Snow Pro recertified engineer now, because to practice as I preach, we've got all of our team to recertify and do the latest exams. So I did mine, and did all my studying for it, and there's a lot of syntax to learn, you know, and you know, whether it's get predefined URL, get defined URL, get stage URL. Do I really care? but I had to for a bit because I had to pass the exam. So, so you're mentioning there about the gap between data showrooms and data backrooms. So what people like to talk about of, you know, what they're doing with generative AI or the cool funky stuff that you know, the art of the possible that we always like to focus on, especially in areas where it's manufactured data or we haven't had to deal with the business. Yeah, when we do have that business reality piece to it, you know, the stuff we are doing, it is all of the, you know, bringing the data in, doing the transformation, doing the data modeling, you know, doing the governance of it, doing your security, the PII of it. Doesn't make a good show. Doesn't make a good thing to go and talk about at these conferences. But if we're able to, you know, how Coalesce and Rivery remove some of the complexity that is needed for all of the edge cases, and you'll get there, but it will also help speed you up to get to that, you know, and you is using a combination of a GUI and a code base that can be used interchangeably. So you can look at it from a code, or you can look at it from a nice GUI, but it's simplifying the creation of getting that value, but it's also simplifying any maintenance of it as well, because it's easier to look, it's easier to make changes, and we make those changes, it's less likely to have failures. So yeah, I think we're all in agreement that automation's good. So, I mean, I suppose on that, where would you suggest a company start then when we're looking at what problem do you see they need? Well, sorry, what problem do you see out there that really should be automated?
Yeah.
Sorry, Taylor first. Go on.
Okay, sure. I think, you know, in terms of like recognizing what should be automated, I think it's first just a matter of, if automation is here to like save us time, then we need to look at where our engineers are spending time currently, right? So, and if and how can we tie that back to actual like value being created? Oh, there's like an echo or something.
Yeah, sorry, that was me. It's gone. Sorry. No, that was it. Sorry. Carry on.
Yeah. The worst part of it was my voice, which is like the worst thing to hear. But but so yeah, if we're looking at what our data engineers are actually spending time on, and we can't tie that easily back to like value that's being created in the business, probably means they're spending time on just like these redundant things, or just things that are like more like low level tasks that we haven't actually mapped back to anything of value. So it's like where we should start is like kind of that area where we could probably take the biggest chunk out of potentially simplifying with automation, or simplifying with, you know, consolidation of tooling or whatever like simplicity means to us based on really what they're spending time on and like why the current task is manual or monotonous. Yeah. I think is like what I would say the first chunk is like look at the time. The second chunk would be like, let's look at the costs, right? Are there, you know, costs in terms of technology? Is it just costs in terms of, you know, FTEs? Like what is taking the biggest chunk of our costs and time? And I think that's where you start in terms of like, how do we simplify?
And I think that's going back to this, you know, this term of business value, and we use the words evidenceable in it. And whenever you're going out to go and get, because time's money, when you go and get your team to go and work on some of these engineering automation, it means you're not doing the engineering work. But if you're able to go and create the right story with the right narrative to the stakeholder, that's the guy that's holding the team that's holding the purse strings, the money. So look, I can evidence that these activities taking this length of time. during a bit of a hackathon time or some other time that's, you know, that people have done that is able to prove or provide some evidence and say, look, this is worth a go of us automating, because we've seen from an initial test it can save a quarter of a man day per this activity, and this activity happens this amount of time. Can we have 5 days to go and build this? You should, you know, get the right answer, and you know, if you've been able to provide assurance that, you know, you will meet that. And the great thing is, after you do that the first time, going back the next time to say, by the way, we've looked at the next thing, we think it's 50 days worth of saving, it's going to take us 15 days. They're going to think, okay, you delivered last time, you've evidenced it, you know, you've bought my trust. Okay, right, next one, we'll go with this, because even though I know it, I'm not going to get what I need in that 3-week period, I know I can get a lot more in that 50-day window, or whatever the large piece is. So I think that is where understanding what everyone's doing in the team, so you can start to record the time taking for these things. So I think I know personally it might be a bit of a headache to go and capture that information when doing it, but as with anything in this data world, even the data our own team collects is really, really valuable when be able to use it to evidence a move to something else. So CJ, I think I'm going to. Taylor's done a great job of the looking at the automation piece. I think there's something about a licensing implication as well. How things are licensed, and how things. I don't know. I'm not going to name names out there today, but you know, certain vendors change how they price running jobs, and that can have an impact on the overall cost. So, what are you seeing? How are you seeing cost optimization with using Coalesce, maybe in those scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess kind of going back to the automation question and the really a total cost of ownership question, right? Step one is you just have to have clear pricing to even start to have that conversation, right? Being a vendor in the modern data stack, if you will, is an interesting place to be, because you can talk to a CFO and do all this math in front of them, and it's crystal clear that the total cost of ownership is going to go down if you're automating a bunch of this work. But the people who are actually using your tool are the data engineers, or the people who are, you know, hands-on keyboard otherwise, who are writing all this code. And, you know, they don't necessarily believe a lot of the time, at least not at face value, that you're going to be able to do everything that they can do just with their engineering chops. And so you really have to spend time and effort on, number one, making a great product, but number two, making sure that it doesn't sacrifice any flexibility, and ultimately is just a force multiplier for that person who's doing something manually today. That's just making them more powerful. I think, kind of as we know, there's no shortage of requirements of a data practitioner. But there's this kind of fear around automation that, all right, if we're going to make you 20 times more productive, you know, what happens to the data team? We literally sell an automation tool and have never seen any of the data teams that we sell it to get smaller. But yeah, what it comes down to for us, like when we do a proof of concept, or, you know, somebody's evaluating Coalesce, because we have static pricing, you know, we price on a developer seat basis, so that we can go in and say, all right, this process today, this thing that you just built, you know, it took 5 people 3 months. Let's rebuild it with Coalesce. All right, that took a week and a half with one person. That makes it really easy to do the total cost of ownership math. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. I think what we find more valuable when we're having these conversations, right? It's easy to kind of do the black and white cost comparisons. But I think where automation gets really exciting, that's kind of the less obvious piece of it, is kind of, Taylor, what you're talking about. When you're able to deliver that speed, it reduces this really crucial gap that exists between the data practitioners and the stakeholders, the folks who are actually, providing the requirements. I think what all of our customers see is most of the time, those data requirements are hazy at best. The way that I kind of think about it is looking at, a menu of a restaurant you've never been to before, versus, going on Yelp or TripAdvisor and actually looking at pictures of the food, right? You have to be able to deliver, I'd almost call it a minimum viable data product to that end user as fast as possible. Get as accurate or as realistic a data set as you can in their hands within a couple of hours or a couple of days, and your requirements are all of a sudden going to be a lot clearer. So we put a huge premium on just delivering something quickly, and then being able to iterate on that, as opposed to spending months and months building the perfect data model, building it once manually, and hopefully, that stakeholder told you the right thing that they wanted, as opposed to working in tandem with them with this iterative process where you can do it 20 times, in the time it beforehand would have taken you to do once. So, when we're able to prove out both of those things, both the cost optimization and, that much more iterative approach, it usually becomes a pretty obvious conversation.
Yeah, I think there's some notes I took as you're going through there. I love the term force multiplier. I think I think Guy Adams mentioned it on a one of the shows, and I think the minimal viable data product. I think again we had John Cook talking about data products, and it was minimal viable data he was using and saying that what's the minimal viable data to make something possible. I think they're really good ways of thinking in this data world to actually. We got a first question as well. I'll go back to that. It's how we start thinking of things as features in a way that's providing iterative capabilities that give you that end piece. But we got our first question anyway, so I was a bit worried that we had nothing questions. I was quickly checking Taylor earlier, but yeah, we are. Everything's out there. It's all good. So yeah, how is coalesce different than DBT? So CJ, I'll let you pick that one up.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a question we get a lot. Right, DBT is, there's no secret. It's the most popular kind of approach to data transformations, at least in the cloud today. It's a significantly different approach. We kind of look at DBT, speaking of the open source project, as having been this great innovation in writing manual code. And it was kind of a response to what I was saying before, where the GUI tools of the past just didn't get it done. They weren't flexible enough. The landscape is now too complex. So, everyone kind of moved away from that and said, all right, well, if I'm going to have to write a bunch of manual code to make things happen anyway, let's just write manual code. And then DBT came along, and it was a significant improvement on just writing SQL in Snowflake, for example. Yeah. Right. It introduces DevOps best practices and allows you to build as if you're a software engineer working with data, which is great. But there are significant drawbacks if you don't have the manpower to get it done, if you don't have the skill sets to get it done. And ultimately, you're still doing a lot of manual work using that platform. And what Coalesce does is we take a GUI first approach. So to be clear, Coalesce is a UI, drag, drop, click, and we are automating all of the manual code you would otherwise have to write by hand in DBT. So it's just another approach to the same piece of the puzzle. There's always going to be some organizations, especially ones that do have kind of the manpower to handle it on that engineering team, who don't have any pain with DBT. But increasingly we see at scale and with teams that have, constraints on personnel, that automation is kind of the way to go. And especially using that GUI approach, it's much more, in our opinion, accessible, easy to learn, and scalable.
Cool, thank you for that. And yeah, I done a better job than I would have, but it does add that. Going back onto why data ops wasn't successful in the early days of the modern data stack, it was because tools out there didn't have that capability to provide that code check in, check out, not held in a proprietary repository. And I think this is where I love both you, Rivery and Coalesce. I mean, Coalesce, it's just generating code. Rivery, it's all available by CLI or APIs as well. So you can have a good way of automating deployments, testing different environments, making sure that you don't get environment drift or even schema drift with other checks as well. Yeah, so I'll move that question. I think we've been naturally going through the questions quite well. We've covered each of them, but without having to call it out. So we talked about why not having automation is not an option now. We've identified ways, also how we identify errors to look to simplify when creating pipelines. And the next one I think we just touched on, which is business engagement. And we use the word business value because the business need to be involved. But getting that engagement has always been a challenge for many different reasons. I think it is getting better. Of how we talk to the business and help that feedback come through in iterations. I've talked a lot. Well, recently I did a post about competitive advantage, and I think having the machine, which is the machine that provides you the ability to deliver that business value, is having automation, is having the ability to create pipelines very easy and maintain them very easy because you've got a nice visual representation. Having less moving parts and not having to have a reverse ETL tool and an ETL tool and manual coding for any infrastructure that may need to be on. So I think we are getting to that stage where the technologies become less. We know what capabilities are needed, but it's getting the business to engage with the requirements to ultimately what we're going to put through this business value machine, as we call it. So how do we get better at that? How do we get better of business engagement? And how can the tooling help with that? I'll go with you, Taylor, first.
Yeah. I'll start. I don't know. I love this topic because I think
that's why you're here, Taylor. You see,
I think it's the root of all evil in the data world, or the root of all problems. I think it's a leadership issue. I think it's essentially for anything really to change in a company, I think it has to come from the business. So I think it's not just building a champion or kind of telling the business this will provide XYZ value. I think it's kind of beyond just finding a champion. It's finding that kind of business, whether it's a department or a specific leader, to lead the change themselves. I think it has to come from the business. And so I think as a data leader, you're pretty much a seller, right? You have to sell what you're building to them ultimately so that they can champion it and beyond internally. Because I think and back when I was my previous life, I was a consultant and on data teams as well. And I think when the data people or the tech people are leading these initiatives, they tend to have a ceiling. Mm-hmm. And so I think the times where I've seen it successful is when you kind of have someone to lift that ceiling, right? And the best way to do it is them doing it themselves, coming from the business side. So I think it's a very top-down thing is where I think the root of the problem is. In terms of technology today, I think to support these things, it's obviously kind of having technology that supports collaboration across teams. but can also support kind of this dichotomy between centralizing things and decentralizing things. I think especially in like large organizations, you're seeing this like push to okay, we want, they're following the kind of themes now that are, the data mesh, data fabrics of the world, which are like, we want to push ownership on domain teams, but like, how do we actually do that in terms of like what tech they're going to use? What's this like environment? Like, what does that architecture diagram look like?
Yeah.
And how do you simplify that, right? And how do we have the same, like, how do we adhere to the same attributes we've tried to adhere to, like in terms of being flexible and like having visibility over like a whole data operation and like the cost that it accrues. So I think like technology, I think still has a ways to go overall with those types of initiatives. But I think the core of it is like having like centralizing the important things like security, governance, et cetera, but being flexible enough to integrate with other products. So having like an open API and also understanding kind of the economies of scale that comes with like the ease of doing your next use case. So what's the time to my next use case? How quickly and cost effectively can I onboard more users? Can I complete a new use case to provide value to the business in ever changing and ever growing requests for data things? But yeah.
Great. I've been making notes, but I'm not going to. I want to give CJ some, and I'll give my views afterwards. So, CJ, what's your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with everything Taylor said. I think the trouble you run into in management in a large organization is the risk reward ratio for individuals is not conducive to taking risks on data projects, right? Data warehousing, data projects have a notoriously high failure rate. And as long as I've been in the industry, right, the running joke is, nobody ever got fired for buying Informatica, right? So you have, ultimately this problem where a lot of the people making these decisions, if they go out on a limb and buy a newer technology that they're able to prove is going to solve a significant problem and actually produce results, or they kind of go after a difficult to pull off data project. If they pull it off, they'll get a pat on the back. They'll get some accolades, but if they don't pull it off, they risk looking like an idiot. And so
they just move on though. They just go, because every CDO doesn't stay longer than 18 months. They move on to another job.
Exactly. So it's tough to kind of build that culture of innovating around data, just because as a group, it's a great idea, but it's hard to find those people who are willing to step up and be kind of that champion, especially kind of the higher you go. So I absolutely agree with Taylor. It takes an executive to be willing to step up and be the champion. And then as technology companies, really our role is to basically arm the data team with the ability to give that executive something to work with, right? And as much to work with as possible, right? It goes back to the same idea of the MVP, right? Give them data sets that are delivering new value to the business quickly, iteratively, and then ultimately, once there's something concrete, it just makes it a bit easier.
Yeah, and I think we were on a big data London. I did a high performance data debate. We had the panel of panels, and Taylor was kind enough to be on one of them. But we had a lady from Sage, Katie Ward, on another one where we were talking about the role of the CDO in organisation. And there's a few things that you mentioned. So Taylor, you mentioned an architecture diagram, which I'm going to put into this story as well. And I think CJ, you were talking about the art of the possible, providing that iterative value to deliver what the business need, and being able to do that regularly will get them we were able to get them on board and get buy-in. But I think the CDOs we have hired, and maybe it was the right time for that role at that period, especially during that Hadoop era or the early days of the modern data stack. It was technology driven to get it in. I think we've now pivoted, and that CDO role, I don't think has been empowered enough in organizations to have that seat at the table to go make the right decisions, or they're controlled by other C-suite members that control the budget for other activities they need for that to be a success. So in effect, they've been set up to fail.
Because it's a technical role.
Yeah.
It's not considered a business role. I think that's well, you change it to like chief decision officer, then that's a different thing.
Yeah, and I think maybe is that what we're needing is the data aspect. And another thing that I get asked questions. I did a research about where the meaning of word data came from, and it's from the Latin from the datum. But I'm not that educated. I just googled it. But but datum actually it infers that data is of the quality used to go and make decisions. And I think you're right. What we really want is and I think we even joked about it, is a chief data products officer or a chief, but they have to have the autonomy for everything within that ecosystem to procure, to buy, or to get. And go back to that architecture diagram piece. And I think the other thing that we've failed, and the CDOs may have failed, is they'll go to the board meeting with a picture of the diagram. We need one of these, and all these components. I've built them. I've done them before and given to CDOs. I've drawn them for them or designed them in Visio many times. There's lines going over it, going how the data's flowing. This technology here, this technology there, and I think that's the wrong approach. I think what we should be doing is having, maybe simplify, 2 or 3 boxes on there. And it's like, you give me my problems, I'll give you your answer. Here the magic happens. You don't need to know. And that's the business. That's all the business ever see. This very simplified picture. Behind the scenes, the analogy of an engine in a car or something. You've opened up the bonnet. Right? All they need to say is engine here. And where the gearbox is. Where your ingest is. Where your chipset for your whatever piece of the puzzle. We know what's needed. We know when to upgrade it or level it up at the right time to win the race we're going to be in. But the business never needs to know what we're changing like that. All they need to tell me is, I need to get around that bend a bit quicker, or I need to get to that corner a bit faster. And then it's maybe not the CDO's one, the CDO's team, the technologist within his team. It's like, you go fix that for us. All right. I'm going to go sell the next problem for the business. I'm going to go sell how we can do that. And I think if we get to that stage, I think business engagement will get better, because I think the business will come to us, and rather than us trying to sell this nice shiny architecture diagram. So we got another question. So we'll go back to that. So it's one for you, Taylor. So you're obviously the favourite on this one. Wouldn't something like Elation be an alternative to data mesh or its API connects? So, I'll let you. I've got some views on this as well. But go on.
Yeah. So I have a lot of views about data catalogs, but So like Elation is, I think one of the like market leaders, like data lineage, data catalog. But at data mesh, which I'm no expert in, I'm no academic in it, but really it's more, to my knowledge, a set of principles that you adhere to. And I think the core of that is really, in my opinion, that there are certain parts of the current kind of flow or stack or the way we do things that are very like bottleneck prone. And we want to decentralize, certain elements of our data architecture so that these like domain-oriented teams can self-serve. And so I think in a product like Elation, where it's a data catalog, sure, you can get to a certain extent there in terms of like self-serving of impact analysis or like, a business glossary of data terms, but it doesn't go very far upstream. data catalog, in my opinion, kind of comes after the fact, right? You build all the things and then you're like, okay, now I need to understand all the things we just did. Like, you're not going to have a data catalog first, right? Before, I mean, business, actually, that's a good discussion. Business probably should have a data catalog first and like define all their terms and like do that first and then build the tech to the catalog. But that's not the way it works, unfortunately. People get Snowflake and then they get Coalesce and then they get Rivery and then they're like, how is this all connected? And then they get Elation. So I think one is a product that I think can only go so far upstream in terms of team self-serving and like building their own pipelines, building their own data products. That would happen in something like a Rivery and Coalesce. Whereas data mesh is more like this ideology, this like new way to think about how we do data at companies. But yeah,
again, better than my probably answer there. I think we are mixing sometimes in the world technology names with methodologies, and I don't think there is a product that does data mesh, as you say. I think Zamack's building one with her venture, but it is a methodology, and I think, as you quite rightly point out, it's a data catalog we're talking about, not Elation, and it's just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. One thing I'd add there is I agree with Taylor. It's like an order of operations thing. You'd probably build the data mesh first. Where I could see Elation fitting into that, I almost think of Elation or data catalogs in general as kind of a treasure map for the new project, right? If you're going into a legacy environment, say, you have this big legacy data warehouse across an enterprise that's built on Teradata, and you want to migrate to Snowflake, and what you're building on Snowflake is a data mesh. What Elation can tell you is which silos of the business use what data, and then that kind of informs how you build the new thing. So that we're partners with Elation, and kind of that's the nature of it, right? It's really Elation and a data catalog in general, when used correctly. The whole idea of it is, let's get a holistic understanding of where data is being used in the business and where it isn't being used, and then you can kind of react to that.
A good addition there, CJ. It links on to the comment earlier of how we get better business engagement. I think having catalogs that are used by the business and helping them understand that business terminology, the business glossary, and how it links to it, and the ownership, and also the associated quality of the data as well. It is going to encourage better business engagement. So we've got 2 more bullets I don't think we've really covered. So we've covered this better, how we get better business engagement. So I think what the common problems is the next one encountered when data engineers create a pipeline. And I'm going to add, I suppose I'll add a little bit of a spin on that. And I think we talked about data modeling briefly as well, and we also talked about better business engagement. When you see the problem, do you see data modeling as being one of the problems out of any other ones you see there? I'll start with you again, Taylor.
Yeah, definitely. I think like in terms of common problems, again, like with the theme we've kind of been talking about, there's like the technical bucket and the business bucket. And I'd say like technical bucket is a problem with the pipeline is it breaks or it's like too low, right? The kind of like lack of stability or lack of speed. The business side of things, I think, which maybe like when you're first building a data pipeline, you don't realize it's kind of this like more death by 1,000 cuts that comes later, is like if you don't understand the kind of relationships of what you're doing in the data to what those mean in terms of like business entities, and how they map to actual value you could create. And so I think like the data modeling kind of world is a really important one. But I also think like there's just a lack of, I think there's still a gap in like kind of understanding and enablement in that world, because I think it sounds really technical. And then people get it sounds really technical, and also people get like really academic with it. They're like, you have to conceptualize this to this to this. It's like, no, like what are the entities, like, how does your company make money, right? What are your costs? And then what are the entities that like that map to that, right? Like, what's a customer? What are these like, you know, even if you're going from like a P&L and going backwards, then it's like, what are all these different categories?
Yeah.
And where do we find that in our systems, right? What systems like hold that data? And then how do we bring it together? So I think like doing that as an initial exercise, kind of before building any sort of stack or choosing any technology is like essential. But then also like revisiting that, right, for different like levels or scales of growth of your company and different use cases that come up. So I think it's like an ever-changing thing. But I also think it's like something that is like, at least with stuff I see on LinkedIn, whatever, it just like comes off as so complex and so technical or academic. Like you need like a PhD in a data model, or read like, you know, full, like understand like full levels of cardinality and whatever. It's like, I don't know. I think it needs to be simplified a little for the business to really like promote it and understand it.
It's like you have two choices. One is just throw it all out the window and don't think about anything before you build it. And the other is spend months and months and months drawing a picture before you actually build anything. And I 100% agree, Taylor. I loved, you know, in the first couple pages of Serge's book, you know, data modeling on Snowflake, he talks about the switch between the tube maps in London, where, you know, before like the 30s, it was topographically accurate, but just horribly confusing for the average person to understand where all the stops were. And then it switched to just being very linear. Here's the order of the stops. Here's where you get off. I think absolutely having a cohesive data model that makes sense to the average business user, super, super important, but not at the expense of slowing down. And I think that's where you come back to the concept of automation. I think of it, the analogy that I think of is I'm a big golfer. And when I go up to a golf hole that I've never played before, I have a little bit of information about it, right? I know how long it is, let's say 350 yards. And I know what I can see. I kind of know which direction it goes in. Then maybe I'll have like a GPS map that'll tell me kind of where certain hazards are. And I'll make a plan based on that information. Because I only get one shot at it. And so I'll really think about it. I'll sit up there and say, okay, I'm glad I have all this information. I'm going to choose which club I hit based on where certain things are. But again, I only have one shot at it. If I had 20 shots at it, I'd still use that same information, but I would just go and gather information as I'm playing, and then go play it again and go play it again and go play it again. And so it doesn't make those pieces of information any less important. And, you know, you take it back to data, right? It's like having that data model is important for people to understand what is going on. But spending 6 months on the picture before you start building, I think is where, you know, getting too caught up in data modeling can become risky.
Yeah. And I think you always hear, well, I know that the founders of your company have come from a previous data modeling Warescape, I believe, wasn't it originally?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you guys know that well. And, you know, Data Vaults has and can be seen as, you know, there's a lot to get done before you actually go and get people actually using that data. And I know Serge had a great book. I know Joe's doing well. He's talking about what appropriate level of modeling is needed. And I think just talking through that there, and we're talking about the business engagement and how we do that, it's got to start with a logical model, you know, and that logical model, it's not that complex to go and get one that defines how your business works. And then using that with some autonomy, with some guardrails, so let your engineers to go and physicalize it how they need to, as long as it's mapped to a verified logical model of how your business operates. That's a starting point. And then iterate around. I know we work with a company called SQL DBM, which can help, obviously, where Serge works as well. So having tools that allow that collaboration to take that from a logical to a physical in a short space of time with quick iterations. should allow you to go and build a pipeline. And if you've got good automation in place, making changes or fixing column names or adding a different attribute is not that much for a problem going forward. So I think nothing's ever perfect, and realizing that in this, and can't be a full purist and go with some standards just agreeing on some standards better than not having any. I think that's another bit of feedback, I'd say. Cool. Where we're approaching, I think we've barely touched on. We're always going ahead to the next question before we get to it. So I think the last question we had was, how can we make the ability to extend and enhance data pipelines easier? We may have touched on some of that. And I'll start with you, Taylor, as well. But it's the order in which we go around. So
yeah, no, I think we did touch on some of this because what I would say probably in terms of extending and enhancing, but one for extension, in the technology world, it usually means like extending to other tools or other services. So I think kind of being as open and flexible as you can be in terms, we mentioned like, having an API, a CLI, et cetera, so that kind of any other tool that speaks, that same language, you can integrate with, whether that's, other parts of the data stack or kind of other parts of any operational platform you'd want to like connect data to. In terms of like enhancing, I'll take it as, kind of in addition to having the kind of code-based or like API-based functionality, I think kind of having the flavor of like a GUI or, self-serve user experience is important as well. I think kind of understanding that, there are many different kind of personas out there. Some people are, offended by GUIs and only operate in code, just as a life, like, as their morals. But I think in terms of, moving quickly and having things kind of already pre-built and pre-configured for you in a GUI, like there's plenty of technical users that prefer that as well, especially for like the quote unquote easy things that you don't really need to customize that much. So I think being flexible, both with how you integrate outside of your technology, but also being flexible within your technology in terms of like who can use it and who can continue to like build and enhance pipelines. Yeah.
And CJ, and I suppose with knowing what your product does as well, I think people are sometimes scared to make changes to dropping columns, renaming columns, adding columns when or duplicating a pipeline rather than going extending an existing one because it's easier because they're not going to break anything else. Is that something you see in the world in the world of Coalesce?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our entire company exists to make extending and enhancing data pipelines easier. So
that might have been a loaded question.
There's a lot I could go into here, but yeah, I mean, if you well, first of all, kind of going off of what Taylor said, this whole idea of making it using a GUI to make what is possible on the data platform more accessible to more people. Great example of that. We have a customer called Patronics, where their whole product is built in PySpark, I believe, and they had moved to Snowpark recently, and things were just moving really slowly. And as we started working with their head of data, he kind of had come to the conclusion that he's like, we have like 3 people who are effectively developing with PySpark, and we're using it to load data, we're using it to do basic data transformations, and we're using it to build our predictive model. And he basically said, let's keep using it to build our predictive model that is our product, but let's automate loading the data in, and let's automate transforming it. And now all of a sudden he has 20 people who can work on those functions. And those 3 can work on the product and get a lot more done. So it kind of unlocks this ability to introduce other people to the equation. If you go back to, the data mesh conversation and really empowering business domains to own their own data. The biggest problem with that is that involves a lot of people across, an enterprise. If you're going to have, a dozen people in each domain working on whatever their data product is, the issue you run into is, what is the quality of that work? Can we ensure that all of those people are writing efficient code, especially if the data platform is charging you based on, compute. So, our answer to that is let's make it as easy to work with that data as possible. Let's standardize the code by generating perfect Snowflake SQL for them. And then, make the advanced functionality of a data platform like Snowflake available through a couple of clicks. So, instead of having to go to a class to learn how to build streams and tasks and work with dynamic tables and things like that, these cutting edge table types and functionality of Snowflake, it's available in Coalesce through a few clicks. It's dead simple to learn how to work with it. And so that's really what we're going after as the functionality of Snowflake becomes deeper and deeper and deeper. It's just about making it as easy to use as possible for as many people as possible.
I think that's a great example there. And I'll go back to the thing I mentioned about competitive advantage. And the more you can provide, the better your team can provide capabilities at a quicker time. You're going to have competitive advantage of getting information out, getting change out to your business. That can have a game-changing effect on your business compared to someone else that isn't that efficient. And if you're able to get more accurate forecasting out for getting more sales, or be able to acquire more customers quicker, eventually you'll take over your competitors. But you're only doing that with data, and you're only doing that with a data capability that is trusted, automated, easy to extend, and you're not building it by doing a copy-paste architecture where you just keep copying, pasting pipelines to help speed up delivery because you're getting blocked, or there's people getting blocked and stuff. We're going to do it ourselves. So yeah, I think that's another area that the CDOs of the world should be focusing on is what can we do to what capabilities we can add to our data platform that can provide that competitive advantage. So we're nearly up on the hour, and so it'd be great maybe to share where people can find you, either on events coming up or maybe on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'll start with yourself, CJ. Where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Number one place is LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, CJ Oordt. But our team, I'm actually on paternity leave at the moment. I couldn't resist hanging out with Chris, so I had to make an appearance. But I unfortunately will not be at any of the Data Cloud World tours in person. I'm a bit jealous. Everyone's traveling around to New York and Mexico City. I think they're in Toronto today. We've been in Amsterdam and Berlin, but there's a few left. So where are we going to be? Look for our team in Toronto today, Amsterdam tomorrow, and then Austin, Washington, D.C., and Santa Clara. Come say hi. We'd love to chat with you.
And probably to point out that you're not Coalesce. The event is not Coalesce the product. So yeah. So I know there's been some confusion on that. So there's a DB. That's where Santa Clara is. The DBT conference at the moment. Is that this week?
I don't know when it is, but
you're not there.
Their conference is called Coalesce.
Yeah. And Taylor, where can they find you, or where will you be in any events coming up?
Yeah, Sam, you can find me on LinkedIn. I don't have Twitter or X, so yeah, LinkedIn for sure. In terms of events, yeah, very similar. I think we're at most of the Snowflake ones upcoming that CJ just mentioned, and I know Coalesce is only Snowflake, but we are data warehouse agnostic, so we're at some of the Databricks ones. I know we're at Paris in a couple of weeks as well, Databricks. So, and London this week in a couple of days. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm not at. I'm having a bit of travel free period at the moment, but I'll be on the show next week. We've got George Miguel. Be a great chat about the value of data quality, which is a hot topic at the moment, and confirmation that SCID 2024 is happening. So anyone that's interested in coming along to that, watch this space.
Missed last year. I need to get there this time.
Well, I think we can create a good story. Saying you missed out because, and also your dedication while on paternity leave. You know, coming on this show. I mean, Armin needs to recognise that somehow. So, but thank you both for coming on here today, and especially yourself, CJ, seeing that. Yeah, you got a new addition in the house that you should be playing with, or maybe you wanted a break. I don't know.
I'll go back to it.
And Taylor, thanks again. I'm sure we'll catch up again soon. I think next week in London, we'll have the meetup on the 24th. So it's the usual space. So yeah, thank you everyone. We're gonna call it a wrap.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Cheers.
Bye.